member of House Democratic Leadership, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Thanks so much for being with us.
Good morning.
Congratulations on the new post, a powerful position. The Situation Room. The president wants congressional leaders to sit with him in the Situation Room. What do you think is going to happen in this meeting?
Well, it's an interesting decision that he's made to finally engage soon-to-be Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Leader Chuck Schumer in a dialogue, because several weeks have passed and we haven't heard anything from the White House in the midst of this reckless shutdown. We certainly need to have a mature conversation about our broken immigration system and figure out how we can fix it in a bipartisan and sustainable fashion. Hopefully, today will be the start of that mature conversation. But the first order of business has to be ending this reckless shutdown that is holding 800,000 hardworking federal employees hostage.
So you sound encouraged that this meeting is happening. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, it's a modest step in the right direction. I'm encouraged by the fact that tomorrow Democrats are going to take control of the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi will be Speaker, and our first order of business is going to be to take a step to end this reckless shutdown and then begin to do the business of the American people.
I have a good sense of what Democrats don't want in these negotiations. You do not want $5 billion for a concrete border wall. What do you want?
Well, in the bill that we're going to put on the floor tomorrow, we're going to allocate $1.3 billion in additional funding to allow for enhanced technology, cell phone towers, satellites, drones, enhanced fencing, increased communication capability, the things that the experts have said are necessary to improve border security. We also want to make sure that we can conduct ourselves in a humane fashion on the border. Never again should we see two young, innocent children killed on the border in U.S. custody.
You just said enhanced fencing. And let me read you. You said this before with Martha Raddatz on ABC. You said, we're certainly prepared to provide additional funding for enhanced fencing, technology, drones, satellite lighting, sensors, cell phone towers, and things that experts say that they want. At the end of the day, what's the difference between enhanced fencing and a concrete wall? If you're willing to have, smart, big fences with all kinds of technology, isn't there room to negotiate between that and concrete?
Well, there are areas along the border where there are currently fences that are put up or barriers that are put up that need to be enhanced, consistent with what the policy experts have said are helping to improve our security along the border. What we're unwilling to do is to pay a $5 billion ransom note for a medieval border wall that Trump wants to put forward, that he initially said, as you know, John, that Mexico would pay for. Mexico has not paid for it. The great deal maker has failed. Then we've had 2 years where Republicans have controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency, no border wall. So why in the world would it be reasonable to expect at this time the American taxpayer would pay for a ridiculous border wall?
Mexico is not paying for the wall. That's why you're having these negotiations right now over 1.3 versus $5 billion. I will stipulate that to be the case, period. We all know that. However, you say additional funding. Does that mean more than $1.3 billion?
Right now it's $1.3 billion, and here's why.
But right now,
Well, in the previous year, where Congress, in a bipartisan way, allocated $1.3 billion, the administration has only spent approximately 6% of that amount. And so that's part of the reason why it's totally unreasonable for him to now shut down government, hold the American taxpayer hostage, and want to extract, through a ransom note, billions of dollars in additional funding. We are prepared to provide, on a bipartisan basis, additional funding, but there is no justification for the amount that is being requested.
And again, he said in that last Oval Office meeting that he would own this shutdown, that he's willing to shut down the border. Again, there's no argument about that. This was his decision. He backed out of the agreement. The Senate all approved that before. I'm just trying to understand completely where Democrats are now about it. You've indicated maybe there's some wiggle room about additional funding, more than $1.3 billion ultimately. You've also come out in support of enhanced fencing. Does that mean any new fencing? Could you support any new fencing?
Well, we'll have to see what the particulars are as it relates to the justification for enhanced additional fencing along the 2,000-mile border. But in terms of a political promise that Donald Trump made during the campaign, and is trying to now extract from the American taxpayer, that's completely unreasonable. And the hope is really we can begin to focus on issues of importance for the American people connected to our For the People agenda, which is what we want to begin to work on moving forward.
What about if the government is able to reopen even till February with some kind of continuing resolution, would you be open to some kind of broader immigration negotiation, which might include more money for either enhanced fencing or the president might say some kind of barrier or wall, and legal status for Dreamers or the undocumented workers in the country?
Well, we certainly need to resolve the issue as it relates to the Dreamers with a great deal of urgency. We can't do it in the context of a shutdown. And I do look forward to having that level of a mature conversation about bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform. But in terms of any particulars, we've got 60+ new members, young, dynamic, exciting, smart, getting ready to contribute. We've got to have a broader conversation with the House Democratic Caucus before I can commit to anything particular. 60
new members, a lot of them young. This is your problem. Now, as the incoming chair of the Democratic Caucus, you, to a large extent, will have to keep them in line. Politico did a profile of you, a glowing profile, which says that you could end up being the next Speaker of the House, maybe even a presidential candidate at some time. You didn't want to weigh in on that on the Politico interview, and I'm assuming you don't want to weigh in on that now.
I'm looking forward to the job that I currently have as caucus chair.
I was anticipating that dodge. However, in this interview, you did say you acknowledged that you felt that scrutiny of him and other younger members of the team is increasing as they audition to take over the caucus once Pelosi and her deputies finally move on. What's the increased scrutiny that you feel?
Well, I think I now have the responsibility to serve as the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, 235 strong. And part of the job that I've been given will be to make sure we can continue to message with discipline, proceed with operational unity, legislate with precision, and enact our For the People agenda, where we're going to focus on lowering health care costs and protecting people with pre-existing conditions, enacting a real infrastructure plan, cleaning up corruption. And so I think all of us feel a sense of responsibility to deliver on those promises that we've made to the American people.
In your race for caucus chair, you ran against Barbara Lee. There were those who said you're not as progressive as Barbara Lee. You're saying no one is as progressive as Barbara Lee. But you know there is tension within the caucus there between some of these new members who are progressives and some of the people who've been around a long time. How are you going to balance that?
Well, I think the House Democratic Caucus is a big tent, and the beauty of what we represent is that we are authentically connected to the gorgeous mosaic of the American people. We are progressive, we have New Dems, we have Blue Dogs, but we're all committed to making sure that we fight to make life better for the middle class and those who aspire to be part of it. That's going to unify us moving forward over the next 2 years.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, tomorrow I will call you chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. Thanks so much for being with us. You have a big few days ahead of you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.